For Chloe Jenkins, it was a choice that took less than 10 seconds, but would echo for a lifetime. A choice made between two tables in a greasy spoon diner, fueled by exhaustion and an old, familiar ache of injustice. She saw a quiet little girl being torn apart by whispers and cruel laughter. She saw a father looking tired and helpless. What she didn't see was that this quiet, unassuming man was Jonathan Davenport, a billionaire whose influence could move mountains. She chose to intervene to be a shield for a stranger. She thought she was just stopping a few mean girls. She had no idea she was about to detonate a bomb in her own life, and that by the time the sun rose again, nothing would ever be the same. The air in the Corner Perk diner was thick with the holy trinity of aromas: stale coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint, sweet scent of industrial-grade maple syrup. For Chloe Jenkins, it was the smell of survival. At 24, she moved through the cramped space with an economy of motion born from 6 years of practice. Her apron, once a cheerful cherry red, was now faded to a weary rose, stained with ghosts of ketchup past and battles with overflowing milkshakes. Tonight was a Tuesday, which was somehow always the worst. It lacked the frantic, tip-heavy energy of a weekend and the quiet resignation of a Monday. Tuesday was just a long grey hallway in the middle of a week that felt 1,000 years long. Chloe's feet throbbed in her cheap, non-slip shoes. Her mind a Rolodex of unpaid bills spun endlessly, her mother's new medication, the looming rent payment, the textbook for her online nursing class she still hadn't been able to afford. Each table she cleared, each coffee she refilled, was a tiny, desperate chip against a mountain of debt. At 7:15 p.m., the bell above the door chimed a melody of weary welcome. A man and a young girl stepped in, shaking off the persistent Seattle drizzle. Chloe's waitress senses registered them instantly. They weren't regulars. The man looked to be in his early 40s with lines of fatigue etched around his eyes, and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a day or two. He wore a simple grey hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. He looked ordinary, like a million other single dads struggling to get by. The little girl, who couldn't have been more than 10, clutched a large, spiral-bound sketchbook to her chest, as if it were a life raft. She had wide, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb everything, and a curtain of dark hair that she used to hide her face. They slid into a booth in the corner, the one with the torn vinyl that everyone avoided. "Just coffee for me, please," the man said, his voice quiet but clear. "And a hot chocolate for my daughter, and maybe a slice of your apple pie." "Of course," Chloe said, offering a small, tired smile. "Whipped cream on the hot chocolate." The girl whose name he'd whispered was Sophia gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes fixed on the blank page of her sketchbook. Chloe felt a familiar pang of sympathy. She recognized the look, the quiet inward retreat of a kid who found the world a little too loud. As she prepared their order, Chloe watched them. The father, she mentally labeled him Grey Hoodie Guy, didn't pull out a phone. He just watched his daughter, a look of profound, aching love on his face. He'd occasionally murmur something to her, and she'd respond with a small smile, never looking up from the pencil that was now dancing across the page. There was a quiet sadness about them, a self-contained bubble of two against the world. Chloe found herself hoping they'd be good tippers, then immediately felt guilty for the thought. They were probably struggling just as much as she was. She delivered the pie and hot chocolate, catching a glimpse of the girl's drawing. It was a fantastical creature part, bird part wolf with intricate feathered wings. "That's beautiful," Chloe said, genuinely impressed. Sophia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. She quickly shielded the drawing with her arm. Her father gave Chloe a grateful look. "She's talented," he said softly. Chloe just smiled and moved on to her other tables, the image of the shy, artistic girl sticking in her mind. For a few minutes, the diner was a pocket of relative peace. The low hum of conversations, the clatter of cutlery, the sizzle from the grill, it was the soundtrack of Chloe's life. But like any moment of peace in her world, it was fragile and destined to be shattered. At 7:35 p.m., the bell chimed again, and a cold draft of trouble blew in. 3 girls, all around 14 or 15, swaggered into the diner. They were a storm of designer logos, shimmering lip gloss, and the loud, brittle confidence of teenagers who had never been told no. The one in the lead, a blonde with sharp, calculating eyes, and a jacket that cost more than Chloe's rent, was Jessica Albright. Chloe knew her type instantly. She'd served them before, demanding, entitled, and leaving a mess and a meager tip in their wake. They surveyed the room like lionesses, scanning the savannah, their eyes landing on the quietest, most vulnerable target. Sophia. They slid into the booth directly behind Jonathan and his daughter. The placement was deliberate, a strategic move in a battle Sophia didn't even know she was fighting. The whispers started immediately loud enough to be an announcement. "Oh my God, look at her sketchbook!" Jessica hissed, her voice a weaponized sneer. "So weird. Who even draws stuff like that?" Her 2 friends, Hannah and Madison, giggled in perfect practiced harmony. "And her clothes. Did she get them from a thrift store's dumpster?" Madison added. Chloe, wiping down the counter a few feet away, felt her jaw tighten. Her boss, a gruff but fair man named Sal, had a strict policy: don't get involved. "The customer is always right," he'd grunt, even when they're a pain in the neck. Getting involved meant risking her job, and her job was the only thing keeping her and her mother afloat. So she tried to ignore it. She focused on the coffee pot, the swirling dark liquid, the hiss of the machine. But the whispers grew louder. Jonathan's back was ramrod straight. Chloe could see the muscles in his neck bunching up. He was a coiled spring of paternal fury. He put a calming hand on Sophia's arm. Sophia, for her part, had frozen. Her pencil was still hovering over the page. Her face, hidden by her hair, had gone pale. The sketchbook that was her shield was now the source of her torment. "Seriously, doesn't she ever talk?" Jessica continued, kicking the back of Sophia's seat. "My mum says her mum, left. Probably couldn't stand having such a creepy daughter." That was it. The line. It had been crossed with vicious, calculated cruelty. Chloe saw Sophia's small shoulders begin to shake. A single silent tear dropped onto the drawing of the winged wolf, smudging the graphite. Jonathan turned his face, a thundercloud. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Jessica just rolled her eyes unfazed. "What are you going to do about it, Grandpa? Buy her another ugly sweater?" The contempt in her voice was absolute. She had assessed him the worn-out hoodie, the tired face, and dismissed him as powerless. A nobody. In her world, power was loud. It was money, logos, and connections. This man had none of that. Jonathan looked like he was about to explode. He started to rise from his seat, his fists clenched. Chloe could see the internal war on his face. He wanted to protect his daughter, to tear these girls apart with his words. But he also knew that a middle-aged man yelling at teenage girls in a diner would only create a scene, a spectacle that would mortify his shy, sensitive daughter even more. He was trapped. His power, whatever it was useless here. Chloe caught his eye from across the room. She saw the desperation, the fury, the heart-breaking helplessness. It was a look she knew all too well. It was the look in her own eyes every time she saw a new medical bill for her mum. And in that split second, Sal's policy, the fear of losing her job, the mountain of debt, It all evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, clear certainty. She put down her rag. Her shift, her exhaustion, her problems, none of it mattered. Someone had to stand in the gap for that little girl. And it was going to be her. Chloe walked toward the Bullies table, her worn-out sneakers making no sound on the checkered linoleum. Her movements were calm, deliberate. She wasn't carrying a coffee pot or a notepad. She was carrying an invisible shield and a very sharp sword. She stopped beside their table, her presence suddenly filling the small space. She didn't look at them at first. Instead, she addressed the air just above their heads. "You know," she began, her voice, even and surprisingly resonant in the diner's low hum, "there's a special on pie tonight. But I have a feeling you three aren't interested in anything sweet." Jessica scoffed, flipping her blonde hair. "We haven't ordered yet. Get lost." Chloe finally lowered her gaze, meeting Jessica's eyes. Chloe's own eyes, often clouded with fatigue, were now piercingly clear. "Oh, I think you have," she said softly. "You've been ordering up a whole lot of misery for the girl in the booth behind you. And that's one item we're fresh out of. In fact, it's permanently off the menu." Hannah and Madison exchanged nervous glances. This was not the typical subservient waitress they were used to walking all over. There was an authority in Chloe's stance they didn't understand. Jessica, however, doubled down. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she lied, her voice dripping with venom. "And I think your manager would be very interested to hear that you're harassing customers." She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the keypad, the ultimate threat. Chloe didn't flinch. "Go ahead," she invited. "Call him. His name is Sal. Tell him that you were loudly mocking a child. Tell him you were making fun of her clothes, her hobbies, and her family situation. Tell him you kicked her seat. Make sure you use the word creepy, because I heard it very clearly. And then after he's heard all that, we can check the diner's security camera, which is right up there." She pointed a finger toward the small black dome in the corner of the ceiling. "It records audio too. It's for insurance purposes." It was a complete and utter bluff. The camera was a dummy Sal had installed years ago to deter robbers. It had no film, no wires, and certainly no audio. But the conviction in Chloe's voice was absolute. The color drained from Jessica's face. Her two friends looked terrified. They were used to their cruelty being consequence-free, a sport played with whispers and snide remarks. They had never been called out so directly, so publicly. Chloe leaned in, slightly lowering her voice so only they could hear. "This world is already hard enough. You have a choice. You can be the person who adds to the darkness, or you can be the person who shines a little light. Right now, you're standing in a very dark place. I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Pay for your drinks." She gestured to the 3 sodas she'd dropped off earlier. "And leave. And don't come back until you've learned how to treat other human beings with a basic level of decency." Silence. The entire diner seemed to be holding its breath. From the corner of her eye, Chloe saw Jonathan. He hadn't moved. He was sitting perfectly still, his expression unreadable, watching the entire exchange with an intensity that was almost unnerving. Jessica, utterly defeated, threw a $10 bill on the table. "Whatever," she muttered, her bravado completely deflated. She stood up, her friends scrambling to follow her. As they passed Sophia's booth, she shot a hateful glare not at Sophia, but at Chloe. It was a look that promised retribution. Chloe ignored it. She watched them until the bell on the door announced their departure. Then she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. She had just risked everything. She turned and walked to Jonathan and Sophia's table. She knelt down so she was at Sophia's level, ignoring the man completely for a moment. "Hey, she said gently. "Are you okay?" Sophia looked up, her eyes wide and still shimmering with unshed tears. She nodded, clutching her sketchbook. "Your drawing," Chloe said, pointing to the smudged wolf. "He's magnificent. He looks like he could fly right off the page and protect the people he cares about. You have a real gift." A tiny watery smile touched Sophia's lips. "Thank you," she whispered the first words Chloe had heard her speak. Chloe gave her a warm smile, then stood up and faced her father. "I'm sorry you had to experience that in our diner," she said formally. The man grey hoodie guy looked at her, and for the first time Chloe saw past the tired facade. His eyes were incredibly sharp, intelligent, and they were looking at her as if she were the most interesting puzzle he'd ever encountered. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Thank you. What you did was extraordinary." "I just did what was right," Chloe mumbled, feeling awkward under his intense gaze. She collected their empty plates and hurried back to the safety of the counter, her cheeks flushed. A few minutes later, Jonathan and Sophia got up to leave. He walked to the cash register where Sal was now stationed. Chloe watched as he paid the bill, a simple $10 and change. He didn't say another word to her. He just guided his daughter out the door and disappeared into the rainy Seattle night. Chloe felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She went to clear their table, her legs feeling like jelly. Tucked under the saucer of the coffee cup was the tip. She picked it up. It was a single bill. A 50. No, wait, she unfolded it. It was a $100 bill. She unfolded it again and again. Her breath hitched. In her hand were 5 crisp $100 bills, a $500 tip on a $10 bill. It was more than she made in a week. It was a mistake. He must have pulled them out by accident. She ran to the door, peering into the dark, rainy street, but they were gone. No car, no sign of them. Just the slick, empty pavement. She stood there, stunned, the $500 clutched in her hand, feeling less like a solution and more like a mystery. The $500 felt heavy and unreal in Chloe's pocket as she rode the late-night bus home. The bus wheezed and groaned through the sleeping city, its fluorescent lights casting a sickly pale glow on the few weary passengers. For Chloe, the money was a spark of impossible hope in a vast darkness. It was Brenda's next round of medication. It was a full tank of gas. It was a week where she could breathe just a little. She felt a surge of gratitude for the kind, sad-eyed man in the grey hoodie. He must have been saving up, she thought, and in a moment of overwhelming thankfulness had given her far more than he could likely afford. The thought made the gesture even more poignant. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled of damp carpets and boiled cabbage. She turned the key in her lock as quietly as she could, slipping inside. The small living room was dark, save for the faint blue light of a medical monitor beside the pull-out couch where her mother slept. Brenda Jenkins was a shadow of the vibrant woman who had raised Chloe alone. A debilitating autoimmune disease had stolen her career as a florist, her mobility and her energy leaving her in a constant state of pain and fatigue. But it hadn't stolen her spirit. "Chloe," a weak voice called from the darkness. "Hey, Mum, I'm home," Chloe whispered, crossing the room to kiss her mother's forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Like $1,000,000 minus 999,000. Brenda joked, her voice raspy. It was their old routine. Even when pain made it hard to speak, her mum found a way to make a joke. "Long night." "You know, Tuesday," Chloe said, forcing a cheerful tone. She didn't mention the bullies or her standoff. It would only worry her. And she didn't mention the tip. Not yet. She wanted to surprise her in the morning. She helped her mother with a sip of water and made sure she was comfortable before retreating to her own tiny room, which was little more than a closet with a mattress on the floor. Sleep didn't come easily. The adrenaline from the diner confrontation had worn off, leaving behind a familiar, bone-deep exhaustion. But tonight, it was mixed with a sliver of hope. She fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of winged wolves and sad-eyed strangers. The cruel light of dawn arrived too soon, filtering through her single grimy window. It was Wednesday morning, the start of another double shift. She got up, her muscles aching in protest, and went to the kitchen to start the coffee. That's when she saw it. Taped to the front of their apartment door was a long, official-looking envelope. Her stomach plummeted. It wasn't from the landlord. His notices were usually handwritten on scrap paper and shoved under the door. This was different. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. The words leaped off the page, cold and clinical. Final notice of eviction. The legalese swam before her eyes. Failure to remit payment. Balance of 4,877,231 sauce. Vacate the premises within 72 hours. 72 hours. The world tilted on its axis. She leaned against the wall, the paper crinkling in her fist. How they were behind, yes, but she'd made a partial payment last week. She'd spoken to the building manager, a slimy man named Mr. Henderson, who had assured her she had until the end of the month. The $500 in her pocket suddenly felt like monopoly money. It was nothing. A drop of water on a raging fire. The hope that had carried her home last night now felt like a cruel joke. A brief flicker of light designed only to make the returning darkness seem more absolute. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. Where would they go? Her mother couldn't be moved easily. She needed electricity for her medical equipment. Shelters were overcrowded and dangerous. Chloe's mind raced, but every path was a dead end. She had no family to turn to, no savings to fall back on. She was standing at the edge of a cliff, and the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. She sank to the floor, her head in her hands. The eviction notice, a declaration of her failure. The brave woman who had stood up to bullies in a diner was gone, replaced by a terrified girl who was about to lose everything. Her mother's soft snores from the other room were a heartbreaking reminder of what was at stake. She had to go to work. She had to smile at customers and refill coffee cups and pretend that her entire world wasn't imploding. She splashed cold water on her face, tucked the eviction notice into her bag like a hidden wound, and walked out the door. The weight of those 72 hours pressing down on her with every step. The city looked different this morning. The buildings seemed to mock her. The people rushing to their stable, secure lives felt like they were from another planet. She had never felt so alone. The diner was oppressively cheerful when Chloe arrived. The morning sun streamed through the front windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sal was at the grill, whistling an off-key tune. The smell of coffee and bacon, which usually offered a small comfort, now just turned her stomach. She moved through the motions of her morning prep in a fog of despair. Every clink of a coffee cup, every customer's order, was filtered through the roaring in her ears. $4, $872.31. 72 hours. She was short with a customer who complained his toast was too dark and nearly dropped a tray of glasses. Sal noticed. "Jenkins, you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired, Sal," she lied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. Around 10:30 a.m., during a lull between the breakfast and lunch rush, a car pulled up outside. It wasn't a beat-up sedan or a work truck. It was a car so black it seemed to absorb the light around it, sleek and silent, and utterly out of place in front of the Corner Perk diner. A Mercedes Maybach. Chloe had only ever seen cars like that in movies. A man in a perfectly tailored dark grey suit emerged from the back seat. He was tall and moved with an easy, commanding grace. He scanned the street before his eyes settled on the diner. For a moment, Chloe thought he must be lost, perhaps a tourist looking for a 5-star restaurant. Then he started walking towards the entrance, and her blood ran cold. As he stepped inside, the cheap bell above the door chimed a sound completely incongruous with his presence. The diner fell silent. Sal stopped whistling. The few remaining customers stared. The man's suit probably cost more than the diner's entire monthly revenue. But it wasn't the suit that made Chloe's breath catch in her throat. It was his face. The tired lines were gone, replaced by a clean-shaven, focused intensity. The stubble was gone, revealing a strong, determined jaw. His hair was perfectly styled. But the eyes were the same. The sharp, intelligent eyes that had watched her so intently last night. It was Grey Hoodie Guy. He wasn't a struggling single dad. He wasn't anyone she could have possibly imagined. He was someone else entirely. Someone powerful. His gaze swept the room and landed on her. He walked directly towards her, his expensive leather shoes making soft, confident clicks on the floor. He stopped a few feet away from the counter where she stood, frozen. "Miss Jenkins," he said. His voice was different, too. The quiet softness was gone, replaced by a rich, commanding baritone that resonated with authority. "My name is Jonathan Davenport. I believe we met last night." The name hit her like a physical blow. Jonathan Davenport, not just a familiar name, the founder and CEO of Davenport Capital, a multi-billion-dollar investment firm that was a titan of the financial world, a man famous for his ruthless business acumen and more recently for becoming intensely private after the death of his wife 2 years ago. He was a legend, a ghost in the machine of high finance, and he had been sitting in her section in a dirty hoodie, drinking cheap coffee. Chloe could only stare her mind, struggling to reconcile the two images, the weary father and the corporate king. I don't understand," she stammered. "My apologies for the deception," he said, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "I try to give my daughter moments of normalcy, away from all this." He gestured vaguely at his suit, the car, the invisible mantle of wealth that surrounded him. "It allows me to see the world as it is not as people think I want to see it. And last night I saw something remarkable." Sal, wiping his hands on his apron, approached cautiously. "Is there a problem here, Sarah?" Davenport turned his attention to Sal, and the shift in his demeanor was palpable. The slight warmth he'd shown Chloe vanished, replaced by a cool, professional polish. "No problem at all. I'm here to speak with your employee, Miss Jenkins. I have a business proposition for her. I'll compensate you for her time, of course." He said it not as a request, but as a statement of fact. Sal, a man who feared no one, looked momentarily intimidated. He just nodded and looked at Chloe. "I need 5 minutes of your time, Miss Jenkins." Privately, Davenport continued, his gaze returning to her. "What you did for my daughter last night, it meant more than you can possibly know, and it showed me a quality I have been searching for. Integrity. I believe you can help me." Chloe's head was spinning. Integrity? Help him. The billionaire. The eviction notice felt like a block of ice in her stomach. Her life was falling apart, and this man, this financial deity, was standing in the middle of her greasy spoon diner, talking about her character. The sheer, dizzying absurdity of it all was overwhelming. "Help you with what?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. He gave a small, enigmatic smile. "I'm starting a new venture, a philanthropic foundation, and I want you to be a part of it. My car is outside. please allow me to explain." He was offering her an escape, a life raft in the middle of her own personal hurricane. But it made no sense. It was too much, too fast, too surreal. And standing there in her faded uniform, smelling of coffee and despair, Chloe had to make another choice. To stay in the collapsing world she knew, or to step into the gleaming black Maybach with a man who was not at all what he seemed. The interior of the Maybach was like stepping into another dimension. The scent of rich leather replaced the diner's greasy air. The city's noise muted to a distant, respectful hum. Chloe sat rigidly on the plush seat, acutely aware of a small coffee stain on her apron. Jonathan Davenport sat opposite her, his powerful presence filling the space. The car pulled away from the curb so smoothly, it felt like they were floating. "Where are we going?" Chloe asked, her voice small. "My downtown office. It's more private," he replied, his eyes studying her. "Miss Jenkins, may I call you Chloe?" She nodded, still too stunned to speak properly. "Chloe, I want to again apologize for my appearance last night. Sophia's mother passed away 2 years ago, and I've been trying to ensure she doesn't grow up in the gilded cage my life can sometimes be. I want her to know the real world. Unfortunately, the real world often includes people like those girls." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly at the memory. I was about to intervene, to use my name, my influence to make a call that would have made that girl's, Jessica's family, very uncomfortable. It would have been effective, but it would have been a lesson in the power of wealth and fear. You, on the other hand, taught a lesson in character and courage. You used no threats, no power plays. You used simple, undeniable truth. You didn't just protect my daughter. You empowered her. You showed her that a single person with nothing to gain and everything to lose can be a shield. That is a lesson no amount of my money could ever buy." Chloe was silent, absorbing his words. It was the most profound compliment she had ever received, and it was coming from one of the most powerful men in the country. The car glided into a private underground garage. They rode a silent high-speed elevator to the top floor. The doors opened not into a reception area, but directly into a sprawling corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of the Seattle skyline and Puget Sound. The office was minimalist, impeccably clean, and exuded a quiet, absolute power. He gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his large, uncluttered desk. He remained standing, looking out the window for a moment. "After my wife, Catherine, died," he began, his voice softer now, more personal, "I began to reevaluate everything. The deals, the acquisitions, the relentless pursuit of more. It felt hollow. She was the heart of our family, and she was passionate about helping children, especially those who fell through the cracks." He turned to face her. "So in her memory, I am launching a new private foundation, the Catherine Davenport Foundation. Its mission will be twofold. First, to create and fund aggressive, nationwide anti-bullying initiatives. But not just assemblies and posters. Real on-the-ground support counseling and legal aid for families. Second, and more broadly, to help children and families crushed by systemic burdens, predatory debt, lack of access to medical care, housing insecurity." He let that sink in before he delivered the crux of his proposal. "I have dozens of people on my payroll, lawyers, accountants, financial analysts. They are brilliant. But they live in this world," he said, gesturing around the opulent office. "They see problems as numbers on a spreadsheet, as cases to be managed. I don't need another analyst. I need a heart. I need a conscience. I need someone who understands what it's like on the other side of the glass." He walked over and sat down behind his desk, leaning forward and folding his hands. His gaze was direct and unwavering. "I want to offer you a job, Chloe. As a community liaison for the foundation, your role would be to be the bridge between this office and the people we want to help. You would vet cases, meet with families, visit schools, and be my eyes and ears on the ground. You would tell me, and my board of directors, what's really happening, unfiltered by corporate jargon. You would help decide where our resources are most needed." He named a salary. It was a number so large that Chloe's brain simply refused to process it at first. It was more than she could hope to make in a decade of working double shifts. It was enough to give her mother the best medical care imaginable, to buy a small house, to live without the constant gnawing fear of impending disaster. "The position comes with a full benefits package," he continued calmly, as if he hadn't just upended her entire reality. "Comprehensive health insurance for you and your mother, a housing allowance, a budget for your continued education, should you wish to finish your nursing degree or pursue something else entirely." Chloe just stared, speechless. The whiplash was severe. An hour ago, she was facing homelessness. Now she was being offered a life she couldn't have even dreamed of. It felt like a trap. It had to be. "Why me?" she finally whispered. "You don't know me. You saw me for 10 minutes in a diner." "I saw everything I needed to see," he countered firmly. "I saw you risk your livelihood for a child you didn't know. I saw you handle aggressors with intelligence and grace, not anger. I saw you show my daughter compassion. In my world, Chloe, that kind of character is rarer and more valuable than all the gold in Fort Knox. I can teach someone about finance. I can't teach them to have a soul. You already have one." He slid a simple, elegant business card across the desk. "This is my private cell number. The offer is real. Take the day to think about it. Go home. Talk to your mother. Go home." The words echoed in the silent, luxurious office, a stark reminder of the eviction notice in her bag. The home she was supposed to go to wouldn't be hers in 72 hours. The irony was so bitter, it almost made her laugh. She looked at Jonathan Davenport, this powerful, enigmatic man, offering her a fairy tale ending, and knew she couldn't accept without telling him the truth. Her integrity, the very thing he admired, demanded it. Chloe took a deep, shaky breath, the crisp, conditioned air of the office, feeling thin in her lungs. The business card lay on the polished wood between them, a small rectangle of cardboard representing a crossroads in her life. One path led back to the diner, to the eviction notice, to despair. The other led here, but she couldn't take that step under false pretenses. "Mr. Davenport," she began, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "What you're offering it's more than I can comprehend. But there's something you need to know. The reason She hesitated, the shame of her situation washing over her. "The reason I needed that $500 tip so badly last night is the same reason I can't just go home and think about it." She reached into her worn bag, her hand closing around the crinkled eviction notice. She pulled it out and slid it across the desk. It looked pathetic and out of place in the pristine environment. "This was on my door this morning," she said. "I have 72 hours to pay nearly $5,000 or my mother and I will be on the street. So while I am incredibly grateful for your offer, I also feel I need you to know that I am not just a person of integrity. I am also a person who is desperate, and I don't want you to hire me out of pity." Jonathan Davenport picked up the notice. His eyes scanned the document, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She had just laid her entire humiliating truth bare. He would rescind the offer, now she was sure of it. Pity was a poor foundation for a professional relationship. He placed the notice down gently. He looked at her, and there was no pity in his eyes. There was something else, a steely resolve. "Chloe," he said, his voice dropping, becoming more intense. "This doesn't change my offer. In fact, it solidifies it. And it brings me to the second part of our conversation." He swiveled his chair to his computer, typed a few commands, and turned the large monitor to face her. On the screen was a complex flowchart of corporate entities. At the very top was a real estate holding company, Albright Properties. Branching off from it were various other businesses. "Your building manager, Mr. Henderson, works for Albright Properties," Jonathan stated, "the sole proprietor of which is a one Mr. Robert Albright. He is the father of Jessica Albright, the girl from the diner last night." Chloe stared at the screen, a cold dread creeping up her spine. It wasn't a coincidence. "After I left the diner," Jonathan continued, his voice precise and cold, "I made a phone call. I wanted to know who these people were. It turns out Patricia Albright, Jessica's mother, is a notorious social climber who is desperate to get into the same charity circles my late wife used to run. She's ruthless and image-obsessed. After you embarrassed her daughter, I have no doubt Jessica went home, told her mother, and her mother made a call to her husband. This eviction notice. This isn't standard procedure. This is retribution. They were trying to crush you for daring to stand up to them." The malice of it, the sheer vindictive power, left Chloe breathless. They weren't just bullies. They were monsters. "But it gets worse," Jonathan said, clicking the mouse. Another web of companies appeared. "Robert Albright doesn't just own real estate. His primary business is a network of shell companies that buy up and trade in debt, specifically medical debt." He typed in another name, Brenda Jenkins. A file appeared on the screen. It was a summary of her mother's medical history, a long list of treatments and costs, and at the bottom, a staggering figure of outstanding debt. The owner of that debt, a company called MedResolve Capital. MedResolve Capital. Jonathan said, tapping the screen, is one of Robert Albright's companies. He buys patient debt from hospitals for pennies on the dollar and then uses predatory tactics to collect. The interest rates are criminal. He's one of the primary targets for the Foundation's first major initiative. We plan to investigate him, expose his practices, and use our legal resources to free the thousands of families trapped in his web. He turned the monitor away, facing her fully. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her landlord, the bully's father, and the company strangling her with medical debt were all the same person. She wasn't just a random victim. She was caught in a system, a web woven by the very family she had crossed. "So you see, Chloe," Jonathan said, his voice low with intensity, "I am not offering you this job out of pity. I am offering it to you because you are now at the epicenter of everything my foundation was built to fight. You are not just a potential employee. You are the perfect first case. You have first-hand knowledge of this family's cruelty and their business practices. Your story, your perspective is invaluable." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with conviction. "I will handle the eviction notice. Consider it gone. I will have my lawyers deal with Albright immediately. But I need you, Chloe. I need your story. With your permission, you would become the face of our first campaign. It would mean going public, telling the world what happened to you and your mother. It won't be easy, but together we can dismantle Robert Albright's entire predatory empire. We can get justice for you and for countless others. So my offer stands, but it is no longer just a job. It is a chance to fight back. The choice was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. It was about taking the pain and fear that had ruled her life and turning it into a weapon for good. The shy, exhausted waitress who was afraid of her landlord was gone. In her place was a woman looking at a titan of industry, a man who had just handed her a sword and pointed her toward her dragon. The first phone call Jonathan Davenport made was to his head of legal counsel. Chloe sat in the leather chair listening as the billionaire calmly and precisely instructed his lawyer to file an immediate injunction against Albright Properties to halt the eviction, citing retaliatory action. He then instructed a separate team to begin an aggressive audit of MedResolve Capital's collection practices, referencing Brenda Jenkins's case as the primary exhibit. The quiet authority in his voice was terrifying and thrilling. The mountain of problems that had been crushing Chloe for years was being dismantled piece by piece in a matter of minutes. The second call was to Patricia Albright. He put it on speakerphone. "Jonathan Davenport," he said, his voice glacially calm when she answered. "Jonathan, oh my goodness, what a surprise." Patricia's voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with fake delight. "I was just saying to Robert we should have you over for dinner." "Save it, Patricia." He cut in his tone, leaving no room for pleasantries. "I'm calling about your husband's attempt to illegally evict one of my employees, a Ms. Chloe Jenkins, as retribution for your daughter's appalling behavior last night. Let me be perfectly clear. My legal team is already involved. If you or your husband contact Ms. Jenkins or her mother in any way, I will bring the full weight of my resources down on your family. We are also launching a full-scale investigation into MedResolve Capital. I suggest your husband find a very good lawyer. Goodbye." He hung up before she could respond. The silence in the office was absolute. Chloe looked at him, her eyes wide. She had spent her life feeling powerless, a leaf blown about by the winds of fortune. In 10 minutes, Jonathan Davenport had shown her what real power looked like, and that it could be a force for good. "You're in then?" he asked, a hint of a smile on his lips. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm without a trace of hesitation. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Chloe quit her job at the diner, leaving Sal a thank you note and an anonymous $2,000 tip from her first advance. Davenport's team moved her and her mother out of the dilapidated apartment and into a beautiful, fully furnished corporate condo with a view of the water, explaining it was part of her compensation package as transitional housing. A team of top-tier doctors, arranged by the foundation, took over Brenda's care, immediately adjusting her medication and treatment plan. For the first time in years, Chloe saw real hopeful color in her mother's cheeks. Chloe, meanwhile, threw herself into her new role. She was a quick study, devouring information about predatory lending housing laws and the intricacies of charitable work. Her past struggles were not a weakness, but a superpower. When she spoke to families trapped in debt, they didn't see a corporate representative. They saw one of their own. She had a unique empathy that no Ivy League degree could provide. She became the heart of the foundation, just as Jonathan had predicted. Sophia became a frequent visitor. The shy, quiet girl blossomed outside the shadow of her grief and the cruelty of her peers. She looked up to Chloe as a hero, a big sister figure. They would spend hours in the foundation's new office, Sophia sketching in her book while Chloe worked, the two of them finding a quiet, comfortable companionship. Chloe learned that Sophia's mother, Catherine, had been an artist, and she encouraged the girl's talent, seeing the same spark of creativity and kindness. The campaign against Robert Albright was swift and devastating. Chloe's story, told with quiet dignity in a series of interviews, became a local, then national news sensation. She was the relatable, courageous David to his corporate Goliath. The Davenport Foundation's legal team uncovered massive fraud and illegal collection practices within his companies. Faced with mounting legal pressure, public disgrace, and the prospect of utter financial ruin, the Albright empire crumbled. Robert Albright was forced to dissolve his debt collection agencies and pay millions in restitution. Patricia and Jessica became social pariahs, their world of privilege and influence evaporating overnight. 6 months later, Chloe stood at a podium in a brightly lit conference room, addressing the Foundation's board of directors. She wore a simple, elegant blue dress, her face confident, her voice clear and strong, as she outlined a new initiative to provide emergency grants to families facing medical crises. Jonathan Davenport stood at the back of the room, not as her boss, but as her proudest supporter. Their relationship had evolved from employer-employee to one of deep mutual respect and a quiet, unspoken affection. He had given her a chance, and she had given him back his purpose. Her life was different, yes. She no longer worried about bills or rent. Her mother was healthier and happier than she had been in a decade. But the change was deeper than that. The waitress who had felt invisible, who had fought a small battle in a forgotten corner of a diner, had found her voice. She had discovered that her greatest strengths were not in her ability to endure hardship, but in the compassion and integrity forged within it. She was no longer just surviving. She was leading, she was fighting, and she was building a better world, one small act of kindness at a time. Chloe Jenkins's story is a powerful reminder that the true measure of our character isn't found in the grand moments, but in the small split-second choices we make when no one important is watching. Or so we think. Her decision to defend a little girl wasn't an investment. It was an act of pure human decency. And yet that single act of kindness became the key that unlocked a future she could never have imagined. It teaches us that integrity is its own currency, and compassion is a superpower that can change the world, starting with the life right in front of you. What did you think of Chloe's incredible journey? Have you ever witnessed a small act of courage that had big consequences? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We love hearing from you. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Thank you for watching, and remember, you never know whose life you might change.